you may, in a little bit of a way, flash on other sort of fugitive movies like The Bourne Identity or North by Northwest. But the stakes are a lot higher here in X2 because it has a very wide scope and a huge cast of characters, all of whom are going through some very intense, very brutal experiences. Chief among these characters, of course, is Wolverine, and his story develops quite a bit here. Going back to the Bourne comparison, he's essentially a sort of superheroic echo of Jason Bourne, a government assassin who has amnesia and can't remember his life before a certain point. And so here we get into some of his past, some of who he was before he joined the X-Men. There are some revelations. But lest we forget, this is a Bryan Singer film, and revelations and the facts of the story, they are of interest to him, but he's a very visual filmmaker. He crafts images meticulously, and he's less interested in dialogue and possibly narrative than he is in the way images create emotions. For example, one of the climactic scenes of the film is a fight between Wolverine and this assassin called Deathstrike. It's a very physical battle that takes place between the two in an underground chamber around this dirty old tank of greenish water. And unlike the villains in the Spider-Man films, this antagonist, Deathstrike, we really don't know much about her. We know she's a brainwashed assassin, so she's not doing what she does of her own free will. But there's no story behind her, really, other than that. She's essentially just a killing machine. And yet, Mr. Singer makes this scene so profound by pushing the violence to the absolute limit in repeated barrages of brutality. We see Wolverine and Deathstrike stabbing each other over and over again and crying out in pain, and the really memorable moment, of course, is when Wolverine is Deathstrike's holding him down on this sort of chain type scaffolding thing, and she's behind him and she's stabbing him in the back repeatedly. And during the scene, the camera is below in this tank of water that's below the two, and we see blood, Wolverine's blood, dropping into the water. And I mean, what a fantastic shot. I mean, Mr. Singer and Newton Thomas Sigel, who's the cinematographer on his movies, only they could create something that amazing. And one of the great pleasures of X2 is that it's pure aesthetic pleasure. There are just shots where you'll be watching and go, wow, that's just amazing that they could create something like that. And it enhances the story greatly because their ability to stage these magnificent images is what deepens the film and gives it its emotion and its complexity. For a moment, we think that Wolverine has beaten Deathstrike, for example, and then she rises up from the tank and sinks her claws back into him again in just a horribly brutal moment. And now I have to drop a minor spoiler, so please bear with me. How Wolverine ultimately kills Deathstrike is that he injects her with a huge dose of liquid metal. Yes, you heard that right, liquid metal. And so, as she dies, we see the silvery stuff pouring out of her nostrils and out of her eyes. And it's a really kind of nasty and oddly beautiful image. But it's very somber too. We hear John Ottman's music on the soundtrack go quiet. It's just it's just a lone, high-pitched, mournful voice. And we see Wolverine, and you gotta love how Mr. Jackman plays this moment. He doesn't look triumphant. He doesn't look proud that he's won. He just looks exhausted. And so the film, it treats violence in a different way than other blockbusters. It gives us a more personal, a grimmer look. And don't get me wrong, X2 is a popcorn picture. There's lots of thrilling scenes. There's funny moments. There's cool battles with high-tech airplanes and whatnot. But Mr. Singer does like to put something darker into his action movies and weight it with a bit more, and you really feel it in that battle. And I don't want, though, however, to give the impression that X2 is this bleak, horrendous film. It's not depressing. It's transcendent. It's beautiful. It's just magnificent. One of the finest. Well, what am I saying? One of the finest. The finest moment in the film. The finest moment in any of Mr. Singer's films is the climax, where the X-Men have won. They've prevented mutant kind from being wiped out by humanity. But they're out in the snow, and they have to escape in their jet plane. And that's another thing I love about the film, that even after they're victorious, there's another challenge to deal with. And this pushes the movie. It pushes it beyond the expected formula of the heroes fighting and winning. It pushes it farther. And in this magnificent scene, again, spoiler alert, Jean Grey, played by Famke Janssen, who's the character's a big part of the X-Men team, she sacrifices herself to save the X-Men so they can take off in the plane before they get struck by this outpouring of water that surges forth when a dam collapses. So we get these wondrous images of her standing firm against the waves as they wash towards her with her arms spread wide, using her powers to hold them back away from the plane. And it's so sad. You're seeing this wonderful person, this beloved character, die, sacrifice herself. And the scenes afterwards are heartrending as the X-Men deal with the loss. And yet, I don't know, there is something beautiful about seeing a sacrifice on screen, of seeing someone, of seeing so much love, of seeing the love that Jean feels to sacrifice herself to save the X-Men, and seeing the love that they feel for her as embodied by the grief that they experience when she's gone. And so, which leaves some pieces to be picked up. The film, at the end, returns to the very place it began, the White House, and in a dark, shadowy, and beautifully surreal sequence, the X-Men pay a visit to the president and implore him to to not make war on mutant kind, to help humanity come together and unite. And in the end, you don't know. Will he? Will he do the right thing? The movie chooses not to answer those questions, and Mr. Singer, he loves a complete journey as much as the next director. But at the same time, he doesn't like to wrap things up too tidily. And besides, if things were wrapped up too tidily, there might not be room for more X-Men movies. And which, by the way, Mr. Singer, although he left the franchise, he did produce the prequel from 2011, X-Men First Class. And now he's directing... he has directed X-Men Days of Future Past, which is going to be one of the bigger, more eventful installments of the franchise, and that's coming out in just a little over a month. So make sure you check back, because you can bet that I will be reviewing that one. Very excited. But going back to X2, there's a sense of stillness and sadness that lingers at the end. We see one of the last scenes is in the office of Charles Xavier, who's the leader of the X-Men, played by Patrick Stewart. And it's a kind of honey-colored wooden room, and it's fairly light. It's a sunny day, and there's a serenity to it. The camera is still. There's no restlessness. The fighting is over, and we see Xavier there with Wolverine, who was in love with Jean Grey, and also with Cyclops, played by James Marsden, who was also in love with Jean and was her actual lover. Wolverine was never able to enter into a relationship for her, but he always loved her even though she was with Cyclops. And there's this just magnificent moment where Xavier says, well, Cyclops asks, could we have done more to save her? And Xavier says, in the past, she may have led us, but this time she made a choice. Essentially, she made this choice to sacrifice herself to save the X-Men. And his response, I love it. It's so wonderful. What he's saying is that there was nothing that could have been done, that Jean did what she had to do. And he's essentially trying to calm these angrier younger men, but at the same time, he's not telling them they should feel better. He's just simply speaking. And I just love the feel of that. And it's the feel of tragedy and loss that strengthens X2. The one of the things about the first X-Men and about many films in general is that afterwards, after you've seen the film, you walk out of the theater unchanged. You leave and you feel as if you're the same. Your life is the same. But with X2, when you turn it off, you've gone through a journey where things have changed radically for the X-Men. And in a way, you are different as well, because you've gone through this journey with them, this radical, eventful journey. And that, in the end, is the essence of movies. To go to a place you couldn't imagine, to be surprised, to be overwhelmed, to be awestruck, to leave the theater or just your living room or wherever you're watching the movie, to leave and feel like your life has changed. Because until even if you've seen the film before, each time you see it, you're essentially seeing it in a new way. And the beauty of the experience of movies is to have seen it in that new way each time, and to leave feeling as if you truly, like the X-Men, have gone somewhere. Well, thank you for watching. That concludes my video about X2 and my series on my favorite films of the 2000s. Please stay with me for in the coming weeks, months, and years, as I will be posting more videos, and of course all kinds of blog posts about films of every era, every genre, and I'll of course stick with us as we move into the summer season. We've got some very exciting things coming up with the projects I'm working on, with the projects that the other Healthy Orange reviewers are working on, and I believe that we have a great and exciting road ahead. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for following me on this journey through the 2000s. And as summer grows nearer, I say this and only this. Happy watching, my friends.